I spent way more hours than I want to admit going back and looking at his plea deal, when it first came out that he might be a pervert and the feds were involved and the Palm Beach district attorney was involved and the feds basically stepped in. Alex Acosta was the U.S. attorney. He later became Trump's labor secretary. And he is the one who stepped in and basically gave Jeffrey Epstein what turned out to be a sweetheart deal. Like 2 counts of soliciting prostitution, which is not what he did. He was dealing with 14-year-old girls. You cannot be a prostitute at age 14. That is child rape. That's what that is. So he got a slap on the wrist that gave him like 13 months of the equivalent of house arrest. He had to go sit in like the local jail for 10 hours a day, and then he was back in his office with an ankle monitor. I mean, it was just a complete slap on the wrist. And it also got Epstein off the hook for any crimes he'd committed prior to 2008 toward any young girls for this slap on the wrist, and prevented the government from coming back and prosecuting him for them, and prevented a bunch of victims for suing him for certain things and from obtaining damages beyond a certain amount, all without getting the blessing of the victims. A court later overturned that, saying, this is so damned illegal, this whole deal. You cannot do this without alerting the victims. But anyway, there was, and I want to make sure I say it correctly, okay? There was an opinion by a court in this case that was deciding the dispute between a bunch of victims who came forward to say, this wasn't well handled, this is bullshit, and the government. And the government in that case admitted a bunch of things to try to get rid of the case, which it did, including 1, between or about 1999 and 2007, Jeffrey Epstein sexually abused more than 30 minor girls at his mansion in Palm Beach, Florida, and elsewhere. 2, Epstein and his co-conspirators knowingly traveled in interstate and international commerce to sexually abuse them, and they committed violations of Florida law and federal law. 3, in addition to personally abusing his victims, Epstein also directed other persons to sexually abuse the girls. For example, Nadia Markinova sexually abused Jane Doe number 1 and other victims at the direction of Epstein. And then here's one of the other ones. The FBI established, the government admits this, the FBI established that Epstein used paid employees to repeatedly find and bring minor girls to him. Epstein worked in concert with others to obtain minor girls, not only for his own sexual gratification, but also for the sexual gratification of others. So I don't know exactly what that means, Ben, but I know that's our government admitting in court that Jeffrey Epstein worked in concert with others to obtain minor girls, not only for himself, but also for the sexual gratification of others. Who are the others? Who specifically? Well, that hasn't been answered. We've heard names bandied about.
One obvious answer is Ghislaine Maxwell, right, who's in prison right now for having engaged in the sexual abuse of children, right? And right. One of the other people that you just mentioned is one of the others, right? Nadia, whatever her name is. So, right. That is sort of the big open question that everyone was asking was, okay, who's that, like Stephen Hawking? Right, because he was one of the names who was mentioned, or Alan Dershowitz was one of the names who was mentioned.
Lex Wexner.
Or Ehud Barak, or Lex Wexner, right? Like all these were and again, here's my thing. I was open to every single one of these theories until the DOJ and FBI put out a memo saying we have looked at all the evidence and here's what we have come to. Right?
You were persuaded by that memo without more? I mean, like I wasn't persuaded. I also trust Dan.
I'm not persuaded by a memo. What I'm persuaded by is the fact that I have not seen evidence that they have seen, and so I'm not prepared to call Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, President Trump, J.D. Vance, and Pam Bondi. It's not the same though. Their two-page memo says no credible evidence. No credible evidence. Well, somebody's made a judgment call there, and you could drive a truck through that exception. Well, I mean, if the idea is that they're supposed to release non-credible evidence, then I'd love to see them, hand it over to a special investigator or to a court. Okay, fine.
But back to my scenario of possible scenario number 2.
It's fine with me, and do a special investigator. I don't care. I mean, I think that'd be good. I mean, that's fine.
I think that would be good.
Is fine. But all of that is fine. But the jump from there to the most extreme version of the theory, I don't find, like, if you're going to cite the theory,
that's fine. I give you that.
It's pure speculation. But if you don't want to,
I'm giving you that.
Like, I like to operate
but
in the world
let's spend more time in my scenario, which is like 1A, between 1 and 2. Of like, they're not covering up a sex ring, but there's enough in there that they find troubling that sees, let's say, major Trump donors that they don't want to embarrass and that have been accused in some way, shape, or form. I mean, even Alan Dershowitz pointed out to me on episode 10 of this show that many others had been accused, and he listed some of them. He mentioned Ehud Barak. He mentioned Bill Richardson. He mentioned a couple of others, saying
Bill
not
Clinton,
everybody.
Donald Trump. right? Everybody,
Bill Clinton, right? Yes. He said, not everybody who's been accused has come forward like I have to say, absolutely not. This is bullshit. Virginia Giuffre is lying. And I'll show you all my records to prove that it's a lie. And Alan said on this show, and without specifying which of those names he was referring to, some of those men likely have something to hide. And that's why they haven't been so forthcoming. So those two things, all right, so just take those two things. Alan saying that, and he was Epstein's lawyer. And then the government admitting that he worked to obtain minor girls for the sexual gratification of others. And we don't know who those others are because the government hasn't told us. So those are questions that we'd like answered. You know, if I got Pam Bondi on this show or at a presser, which I would travel to ask her questions, I want that answered. Her memo doesn't do it for me.
I agree.
You know, non-credible evidence is not good enough. Not good enough by far.
Well, I mean, again, I think that in the world of the DOJ and the FBI, for what they are, law enforcement agencies, it may not be good enough for public consumption, but that's sort of what we've been saying from the outset, right? Is that more transparency with regard to the public is necessary. That's not quite the same thing as, do the DOJ and the FBI have the legal grounds to prosecute or release information that you want prosecuted or released? Right? That's kind of a different question.
Yeah, I don't know that they do have the grounds to prosecute.
I don't either, but I mean, I would suggest that they probably do not, given that they're not doing the prosecution. That's a different question from informational release or answering questions on a straight up basis.
Agreed.
Again, that's the reason why Dan is pissed, is because he's saying, release the information that you can release, or at least answer the questions that you can answer.
Right, I think that's true, because I do believe Dan is convinced there is no case to be brought and there's not some huge scandal behind the scenes. And I think, yes, one of his frustrations is, why doesn't Pam just, as the spokesperson, she's his boss effectively, go in front of the microphones and just answer all the questions so that you and I and Tucker and everybody else can be as convinced as he apparently now is that there's no there. I mean, the problem for the administration is, yes, those two top officials at FBI and many in the president's orbit. You know, this is another thing I spent the weekend looking at. Not so much Trump, but J.D. Vance, Don Jr., Alina Habba, many of the president's surrogates have been stirring the Epstein pot now for years. And so, you know, we are owed more than a 2-page memo being like, there's no there, now move on.
I mean, I totally agree with you on this. And I still think that there's a gap between that, which I agree with, and the most extreme form of the theory is true, and now it's a giant Trump administration cover-up, but I won't actually name the members of the Trump administration because I'm a coward.
Okay. Now let's talk about whether, oh wait, no, I wanted to play this Julie Brown soundbite first. Sorry, before we move on from like what's being withheld, what's potentially out there that they're not telling us, which led to the big dispute between Bondi and Bongino and all that. Julie K. Brown is probably the reporter who's done most on Epstein. She's annoying because she hates conservatives, in my viewpoint. And I really can't stand people who report on big, important stories like this and draw those lines. It's just bullshit. You know, when you're talking about the protection of minors, like I asked her to come on the show in 2020. I asked her for help trying to figure out what's happening with Epstein. Nope, wouldn't do it. I'd love to put her on now. She won't do it. She goes on the lefty podcasts. I think she was on with Jim Acosta. She went on with Dan Le Batard, right? But she's not going to do a conservative podcast because I guess in her mind, you only give a shit about little kids if you're a liberal, even though her side of the aisle has taken huge dumps on this story since the day it was broken. That no one had time for Julie K. Brown and her reporting other than people on the right, as you know, Ben. But having said all that, she's annoying, but I think she's honest. And she did go on this Le Batard show on Saturday and spoke to what's likely still out there that could be releasable on Epstein. Here's part of it in SOT 6. Is it 6 or 7? I'll let Debbie figure that out. 7.
Are there more Epstein files?
Oh my God, yes. There's tons of files. Tons of files. When she said she had the files sitting on her desk, I was just stunned. I'm like, those files wouldn't even fit in her office. I mean, it's remember, they did an investigation way back in 2005. All that stuff had to land at the Justice Department because, you know, they did a subsequent investigation in New York, so they had to look at everything. Right. And remember, the Department of Homeland Security has records because he went in and out of all those airports with his private planes. They kept track of who was on his planes. They haven't released that. The FAA has flight records that haven't been released. There's been tons of material in different government departments that even hasn't been released. And like I said, you can look on the vault. There's 20, 30 parts. Jeffrey Epstein part 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you click on all those things, you'll see hundreds of pages. So there's probably tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, so.
That are still missing, that are ostensibly at this point being covered up. Right,
because they're all redacted.
It's the FBI's The Vault. So that's her saying there's more. There's a lot more, Ben. And then I'll just give you one more from her. She also has serious doubts about the cell block tape showing not Jeffrey Epstein's cell, but the area outside of his cell, which she does not credit in any way, shape, or form. She completely rejects that as evidence he did not kill himself, or that he did kill himself. Sorry, I always screwed that up. Here she is in, let's see, SOT 6, I think it is. Yeah, they got it.
I covered prisons for about 4 years, and I can't even tell you some of the stuff that people get away with in those prisons. They know exactly where the cameras are. They know exactly how to commit crimes where nobody knows how to do them. It is a science to them. I mean, these prisons are full of corrupt people, and it's just not a far-fetched idea and not a conspiracy theory to think that something else may have happened. Now, I'm not saying he was murdered. I just don't think we know the full story.
Okay, your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that last quote's about as vague as it's possible to be. I mean,
she did go on. She did go on. She talked about how you can't see Jeffrey Epstein's cell. You don't know whether another prisoner went in there.
That's fine. But when she says she's not saying that he didn't commit suicide, but it's possible. What I want to know is then who killed him. So again, I'm only operating off the evidence that I can see in front of my eyes. We can all speculate as to the evidence that we can't see, but now we're doing kind of God of the Gap sort of stuff. Okay, well, I mean, I don't have evidence of what the other two cameras that were broken or allegedly broken saw. And I don't have that, and you don't have that. Nobody has that, right? It doesn't exist, supposedly. And as far as this camera, all I can see is what's on the footage that we were presented. So I can speculate, but my speculation is not worth very much. And I don't think hers is on that particular score either, considering we now have multiple autopsies. So you can either believe it or you can't believe it. But if you're going to provide an alternative theory.
One is the medical examiner who said this is a suicide, and one is Dr. Bodden who said, no, it doesn't look like one.
Well, Dr. Bodden, I don't credit for very much. I mean, his prior history with autopsies is rather checkered. And when it comes to the DOJ also did an autopsy and an investigation and found that he committed suicide as well. And again, I've talked to without revealing sources, the people in the federal government who I have talked to who are familiar with the details of this case have said unanimously that it was a suicide. Now, again, you can say that they're all lying.
I totally disagree. I have my own sources high up in the law enforcement, let's say, I'll just go that far, who say not only do we believe he was an agent, but we don't believe he killed himself.
I mean, that's fine. Then they should come out and they should say that. And then they should say who's covering that up.
Since President Trump was sworn in, his administration has made enormous progress at a breakneck pace. But don't forget, while they're moving mountains for the good of the nation, you've got your own personal savings to worry about. And one of the best ways to look after your savings is through diversification, particularly with gold, like from Birch Gold Group. In the past 12 months, the value of gold has increased by 40%. OMG. Central banks continue to bolster demand for gold by buying in record quantities. Global instability and tension is high, and Birch Gold makes owning physical gold extremely easy. Easily convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, or buy some to store in your home safe. Just text MK to the number 989898, and Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, just useful information. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, take control of your savings today. Text MK to the number 989898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.